Good, whatever this is. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Welcome. Not legal advice. Please like, share, subscribe, follow me at Not Legal Advice on Twitter. That's one word. Please share with your friends, your enemies, your pets. I haven't been talking about the pets. Please share with the pets. I know Aggie, my Rhodesian Ridgeback, watches all these videos. In fact, she gives me a lot of the ideas. So blame her. She also gives me some of the jokes, but so be it. So I kind of wanted to do this yesterday, but I waited till today. Nothing much has happened except a whole bunch of stuff. So I figured I'd talk about a few things. What I was going to talk about, you're supposed to say what you're going to talk about, and hello. Hello out there. I like doing this. So I started doing this. Hello, the one. I like that. The one. John and Anthony, Dustin. What is that? Fadi? I like that name. Fadi Malouf and Jason Z. Welcome. And whoever else is watching us, welcome. To the extent I could see your comments, I will comment. But obviously, when I'm looking over, remember, we're a left-eyed person. Can't see out of the right eye. Comments happen to be on the right eye. But anyway, be that as it may, I'm going to talk about Finra and the bill that came down. I'm going to talk about tariffs. I'm going to talk about Piper Rochelle. If you know who that is, that probably is obvious. If you don't, then it'll be an interesting story, I think. And I saw it last night, so that's why I'm going to comment on it. Before I start, of course, I'm going to talk about the CAT system briefly also. Before I start, of course, just wanted to bring you up to speed on a couple of things, couple of very important things. By the way, this is obviously not legal advice. You obviously knew that. If April showers bring May flowers, what do May flowers bring? That's an obvious answer. Of course, it's pilgrims. What do you where do you take someone who's been involved in a terrific and terrible peekaboo accident? Of course, you take him to the ICU. And last but not least, claustrophobia is the fear of closed spaces. Like, I went to the liquor store last night to buy some vodka, and I was scared it would be closed. Anyway, talking about three quick things. I'm going to do it in the order of that you might have interest in, or most people would have interest in. First in tariffs, change in tariffs. So apparently last night after the market closed, after the end of the day, I don't know precisely when. I think I didn't see it as of 5 Pacific time, but at some point in time, and it was more made apparent more this morning, the administration has exempted all smartphones, all chips, all electronics, or most electronics, or a good amount of electronics from from tariffs being imposed on China. So that would seemingly assist Apple, Nvidia, and everybody related to that. Might help Tesla too. So if in fact there's no other news that negates that action, I would expect, and I'm not predicting, this is obviously not financial advice, but I would expect market to go up on Monday, or at least at some point in time on Monday, because that would be a substantial reduction in I think it was like 100 and whatever it is, 125, 145% tariffs. They're still there, but if they exclude most of the products which are subject to tariff, then it's obviously a much smaller number. And it's obviously it's a significant move, and I'm sure the people from Apple were very happy. I think I saw that the Apple had inventory of about 6 weeks left of iPhones, um, before they would have to produce. So that's a big issue, cost saving thing, etc. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. I'm sure it will be reflected in the market absent other news, although I'm sure there will be other news, good and bad, so we will see that. But I saw that. I thought it was very significant, and so be it. As to the tariffs, I did a video last week that not a lot of you watched, but was terribly exciting and entertaining. And it was about Supreme Court action on tariffs. I wonder. So there was a case filed in federal district court in Florida about last Thursday, I think. Last Thursday, yes, about a week ago, challenging the tariffs imposed on China. It was brought and funded by former advisor for Trump, who had helped him get three members of the Supreme Court in Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. And I don't know if this gentleman supporting that particular lawsuit may have accelerated the exceptions in the tariffs or may have played a role. But it will be interesting to see if the tariffs against China go forward, how that plays out, and how this gentleman, his last name is Leo. I think it's Leonard Leo. I don't remember the exact first name. I remember his last name is Leo. He was a advisor to Trump in the first administration. He helped with the plans about making a conservative court, but he's on the opposite side now on the Chinese tariffs. Now, is that because he's interested, has some financial interest, or he's making a play on behalf of somebody? I don't know, but he is representing a business person who imports materials from China for their small business, and that's at play also. And since and maybe the reason we see exemptions from China are that the White House might be concerned that this gentleman who is their advisor and is well respected might have a possible good case and might be able to overturn the tariffs on China. That fact that there is a case that might go to the Supreme Court, or if it in fact goes to the Supreme Court, also might be some inducement for getting negotiations completed in a more expeditious fashion. So I think this is all going to push things to a resolution, especially since it's a gentleman who was previously advisor for Trump. I think he left on good terms, so it's not like they left on bad terms, although I don't know that. So that's the tariff part. New news, and maybe in the background, the lawsuit is impetus for getting that resolved. And I think if we have certainty in the market, whatever the resolution is, that would be probably good for the market, because the market, as we know, is forward looking and doesn't like uncertainty. So the second part that I wanted to briefly touch on is that was introduced by Representative Linda McClain from Michigan. And I'm going to show you the bill. See, this whole pile, this is a big pile of stuff, right? And this is the bill, 2 pages. The bill is 2 pages long. So what this bill is, basically, this big 2-page bill. We've talked about bills that were in Congress that were like thousands of pages. So what this bill does, and it was introduced and then sent to committee. So it hasn't been to a committee yet, but it was introduced, and basically what it does is it amends the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934. That act was that came in effect after the Great Depression. I don't know why that depression was so good. I think most depressions suck, and I think most recessions suck, but they call it the Great Depression. But whatever, I would say it was the nasty depression or the bad depression, but so be it. The Securities and Exchange Act of 1934 came about. It was designed to protect investors. So what she has proposed is basically and at the time, the parties that were named are not Finra, for example. There was a different party. So what she has made this whole 2-page bill, this is the entirety of the bill, 2 pages, or the proposed bill. It says all authorities and duties provided to the National Securities Association, including a registered National Securities Association, a la FINRA, under the securities law shall, on the effective date of this section, be transferred to the commission. So it's basically saying that all FINRA's powers will be transferred back to the SEC. All their powers about governing their own members, brokers, capital markets, being able to do U3 halts, for example, for the MMTLP crowd, all that stuff will be no longer within their power, that it'll be all given back to the SEC. And the SEC was delegated that through that legislation. And there may be other issues with regard to the SEC. We've talked about, and that would include, by the way, enforcement power, FINRA's enforcement powers. So those would be given back to the SEC. We know the SEC has certain other issues if they pursue an action against a broker and it involves monetary damages and a claim that could have been brought in common law, for example, fraud or theft, something like that, then those cases can't be adjudicated by the SEC. They have to go before an Article 3 court, a federal court. So some of the powers that are being sent back to the SEC have already been limited by the Supreme Court. They did it in the Jarkessi case, for example. So sounds good. If this happens, FINRA disappears. Basically, FINRA disappears. Stuff goes back to the SEC. We could bitch about the SEC. There is no absolute immunity of the SEC, and we could deal about discovery issues, whatever. So it sounds fantastic. Of course, you have to read the entirety of the bill to kind of get the total gist of what's said. So the end of this 2-page huge document: the amendments made by this section shall take effect on a date that is 2 years after the date of enactment of this act. So what it says is this thing won't go into effect until 2 years after this bill is enacted. And so it hasn't even made it out of committee or to committee. The committee that the Financial Services Committee that it went to, I know a lot of those members were also ones who reviewed the MMTLP situation. And in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I didn't think they did jack, or nothing of significance enough to move the action forward during that time. But that was a different time, different administration. Maybe things will be different. Maybe it'll eventually will make it through a committee, and maybe eventually it will make it to the House as a bill to be voted on, and maybe eventually it will make it to the Senate. A comparable bill will be introduced in the Senate, and it won't be opposed, and maybe that will be granted at some point in time. Maybe that's done expeditiously. Problem is, we're talking about into the next congressional term, and with a new Congress. And obviously, a new Congress could put a new law in that completely negates the impact of this. Additionally, in the meantime, while this thing is pending, everybody can undertake actions to prepare for the ultimate. So 2 years, a lot of time for somebody who might be a bad player to be able to figure out a way of dealing with this change in way things will be handled. It doesn't really solve any problem. Again, I think it's just an illusory thing. Sounds good, but it doesn't. Even if approved, wouldn't go into effect for a minimum of 2 years. I don't think if new administration, or if there was if let's say the midterms changed the House composition, then we may have a change. It's very possible. And there's no good reason not to put it into effect in 6 months. I'll give you 6 months. 6 months for FINRA and the SEC to get their act together. Use Doge to close FINRA and to establish a more smooth, streamlined system of running the SEC. Let it go. I think all enforcement should be taken away from the SEC, should be handled by the DOG and the AG. DOJ, not the DOG. DOG is my dog. DOJ, sometimes a dog. AG, Attorney General, also sometimes a dog. But those can certainly administer those proceedings before Article 3 judges, like Jarkessi says. We really don't need the SEC to be the enforcement arm. but we need the SEC or some strong body to be there to protect us. So getting rid of Finra is great. Giving it to the SEC is fine, but we need somebody at the SEC to have balls and to stick up for us. And the concern I have is yesterday I saw a story that said the SEC is considering blunting its CAT system. The CAT system was a system that was implemented like some 15 years ago to help track fraud. I don't think it's done a very good job, but it's obviously it's been more implemented over recent times. And there was a story yesterday that the new SEC chairman and possibly the SEC is looking to back off on that system because of concerns, privacy concerns. I don't really understand the privacy concerns. I guess names might be exposed, but clearly and obviously, if it's a software issue, that can be corrected. So to the extent that a consolidated audit trail is needed, you can prepare it and redact the names. So it doesn't make sense to me, but that was the purported reason. It doesn't make me feel comfortable and comfy that the new SEC is taking that stance, especially when the bill that was introduced, if allowed, would move the authority from FINRA to the SEC. So I didn't like that. Now, in the meantime, I think there's going to be court matters that will proceed 2 years, even if that bill is passed. And I think those court matters, presuming they happen before we get any approval, might decide the issue about whether the SEC has authority, whether FINRA has authority, whether this bill is a necessity. And I'm doubtful about whether that bill will go forward. I really think that's more the court's going to have to act. We know that Alpine, who is the prime broker for GTII, has a case or asked for cert on their expedited expulsion, but they got expelled separately from that. I expect them to file another cert challenging the system of FINRA since they have done it already. And that may circumvent the necessity of that bill, but it will depend on what happens with that particular case. Clearly, in my opinion, and JR's opinion, because we've talked about it, the Supreme Court wants to limit regulatory power. In the last hearing that occurred, FCC versus Consumer Research, it was clear the conservative justices wanted to find a reason to limit the FCC's power. It just happened, I think it was a bad fact case for that, and the attorney representing that side did a poor job, in my opinion. So that's it. But there are cases that I think are going to go up involving the SEC and FINRA, and I think it may circumvent the need for that particular legislation. I think this legislation is weak, and I'm very unimpressed. I think the idea is great. I think kind of without any teeth, because it doesn't give you any real implementation during the term of Congress. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but whatever. It's better than nothing. We'll see how it goes. Maybe others will introduce maybe that bill will be amended, and maybe the implementation date might be changed to 6 months or 90 days, whatever. And certainly we'll get exposure. If that happened, we get exposure to FINRA and perhaps like documents that people have been searching for example, an MMTLP. Perhaps those would become available. So it'd be interesting to see what happens if FINRA is abolished. But again, in my view, it's going to have to come through the courts first before any of these bills are likely to be really considered. And again, in light of the SEC's apparent pullback on the CAT system, or their desire to pull back on the CAT system, again, I'm concerned that we as retail shareholders are not protected. So that's an important thing to monitor, and I'll keep you apprised about that and all the Supreme Court actions that are ongoing. Last but not least, I saw something on Netflix last night involved somebody called Piper Rochelle, who was a child, I guess still is a child. I think she would be 18. I don't even know how old she would be. But apparently she was her mother made her very famous. Perhaps she was super talented, but they did a bunch of YouTube videos. They incorporated a bunch of other kids into that. They were all underage. I mean, they were young kids. I think when they started, I think she was like 9 or something, and the other kids were young, and they followed them. And there was some would leave and some would come in. And kind of the basic theory of that particular um, the was a 3-part docu something, however you call it. I guess the theory was that these kids were being used. They were involved in inappropriate conduct. There was no like claims that they were specifically sexually abused, but it was more language, inappropriate conduct that might really verge on that. And a lot of these kids were really disturbed by that because they were very young. And apparently, the mother, this is the claim, the mother of Piper Rochelle was the one kind of, along with her boyfriend, is basically orchestrating this thing over many years. They made literally millions of dollars. They made a lot of money. She had, I think, million or more viewers or subscribers on YouTube, which I think is like 4 more than me, by the way. And so, but things kind of, as things went on, people would leave, and then kind of it was explored, and then there were claims of mistreatment. None of them went to school. They worked, like 15-hour days. They were just treated poorly. Their families let that go on because they would get famous, they'd make money, and that's kind of how it would go. Eventually, some of the parents figured it out, whatever. Then a lawsuit arose, so they sued the parents. I think 11 of the kids sued not Piper Rochelle, the kid, but her mom and her boyfriend. Uh, the litigation went on. It was in LA where the litigation was. So now these parents let their kids be exposed to the situation. Mistake number one. This was even to the extent that they would go, there was like a main house, and they were excluded from the main house, but they were still okay. They let their kids participate in this, and they didn't intercede. Eventually, litigation arose. They settled the case for 100, I think, $1.85 million. I don't know if insurance was involved or if that was out of the pocket of the mother and the boyfriend. But 1.85 million divided by 11, excuse me, 1.85, then you subtract legal fees, probably 40%. So, and I'm speculating here, but I'm not going to be far off. But if you take off 1.85 and you remove legal fees of 40%, that's about 700 grand. So that would leave you about 1.1. There might be costs. Let's say it's another 100,000. So let's say that's a million divided by 11. So that's about a little less than $100,000. One of these parents referenced that their kid was really pissed off about the settlement because she wanted to have a chance to express herself in court under oath and kind of like get it out there. And despite that, her parent took the money. So it annoyed the crap out of me. First of all, the parents basically, it happens. I know it happens because it's happened, so it happens again. First of all, the parents abandoning the kids and kind of like closing their eyes because of the monetary gain and the fame and fortune. And then at the end, again, doing the same thing by, as opposed to letting their kid kind of resolve their life issues. Because you can imagine as a kid, I mean, it happens that kids who have these um, overwhelming experiences are impacted emotionally in their lives. And so perhaps by expressing it and by being able to be vindicated, that might give them the ability to live a quote unquote normal life. And 100 grand might be a lot of money, but it's over the course of your life, it's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. So this one parent in particular, so she let the kid be exposed to this, let the kid be traumatized. And then when the kid wanted to be vindicated and uh, have their voice heard, the same parent took the money and re traumatized the kid. It really pissed me off. So I was pissed off at the mother for Piper Rochelle and the boyfriend who seemed to be just misguided. I'm going to be very generous. That's really generous. I was annoyed at the parents in general for letting their kids be exploited. I was more than annoyed at the parent who didn't let her kid have her day in court. Thought it was obscene in a way. And it's basically if your kids are, the bottom line was when you see kids who are big, have really big followings, it may not be so nice for them, even though they're famous, making money, etc. This kind of like pulled the curtain back on what's going on. And I think it just was one example. That was the idea. This is one example of what's going on. And there's probably a lot of this going on. And we presume because somebody's famous and making a lot of money that everything's hunky-dory and everybody's okay. This kind of showed the opposite. But again, the parents still didn't learn the lesson. So that's it. I just wanted to talk about it because it really annoyed me and I saw it last night. So we talked about Finra and that crappy bill, or at least the bill's not crappy, the enactment date's crappy, and whether it actually goes into law, whether it gets out of committee, we don't know. We talked about tariffs and the change in tariffs, that electronics, smartphones, computers are exempted, and I personally expect Apple and Nvidia to run. We talked about Piper Rochelle and these kids who seemingly got abused, and the parents who couldn't learn a lesson. And we also talked about the CAT system, the consolidated audit trail, and that the new SEC seems to be pushing back on the necessity of that due to the need for confidentiality. And my suggestion is just redact the names. Not really hard. Anyway, hopefully that provides you some information of interest. Hope everybody is well. We will talk to you soon. We being JR and I. Hope everybody has a great day. If anything else pops up that I find of interest, I'll throw it out there. For everybody else, have a great day whenever you see this, or great night, or whatever. And if you have questions, put them in the comments. And for everybody else, have a great day and be well.